So a little background about me. I was born in a town called El Rancho de Jimenez. It's about 100 people live there. It's a very small town, mostly farming, and there's a lot of other ranches. We call them ranchos, so small towns. The majority of the economy there is working in the fields, mostly corn, uh, onions, lentils, and that's what my dad used to do and my grandpa used to do. And what would happen is that my dad in the 80s, my dad would migrate up north to the U.S. He would work in California, and then they would go to the season in Texas, or sometimes they would go to Florida, or sometimes they would even go to Ohio or North Carolina. So in North Carolina was the tobacco, and in Florida was the oranges. In California was construction and also the fields, and in Arizona it was the fields. But they moved from working in the fields, be farm workers, to working in construction because in the 80s, what happened after IRCA, which Immigration Reform Control Act, which was known as the amnesty under Reagan in 1986, what happened is a lot of more CBP were called into the fields, and they were getting deported every week or 2 weeks, so it was hard for them to make a living. So one of the guys, specifically the older ones, were able to find work in construction, which paid more, and for them it was easier work. Working in construction is easier than the fields. The field is hard work, and that's why they moved into construction, and that's where my dad currently works. But the reason we migrated, multiple ones, mostly economic reasons. One of the things that I didn't know is when when we were younger, my brother got really sick, and there was an illness that happened with a lot of the people there. And what ended up happening is that my mom took him to the hospital, and the doctor told him, "Hey, this is how much it is." We didn't have the money to pay for it. The doctor told my mom, "If you can't pay for it, we're going to. I want to adopt them because I want the child to live." And my mom basically scrapped. Told my dad to hustle to get as much money as he could. So my dad in the U.S. hustled a lot of money. My mom also in Mexico. And ultimately, my brother was taken care of, and then he was well. So that kind of forced us to migrate. There's other factors. If you know a little bit of history, in 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement made it harder for Mexican farm workers to compete with big U.S. farm workers, as the U.S. subsidizes the agricultural industry. So that made it harder. So that made it harder for my dad when he went back to Mexico after the seasons here in the U.S. to make a living. The other one was the assassination of Colosio, which was going to be the president in Mexico in 1994. That created a little shock in Mexico and distrust in the government. Then it was the devaluation of the peso in December of 1994 that basically erased a lot of the Mexican savings, and the peso decreased. And when that happened, is the U.S. and the International Monetary Fund came in and gave loans and helped bailout package basically. So those things contributed, but I didn't know that. I just knew that we're gonna go to to El Norte, and when we crossed somewhat easily compared to a lot of folks because we didn't cross through the desert. We crossed through the port of entry in Nogales. At that time in 1995, it was different border, and two college students actually helped us cross. So it was my mom, my two older sister, my brother, and myself. Looking back at that, I thought it's scary to think about just a mom in their late 20s trying to cross the border by herself. But that's what a lot of parents do, right? They try to make sure to do the best for us. Growing up here in the U.S., I grew up in the West Side. I went to high school in Carhaden. And I initially wasn't that academically inclined. I failed the first grade actually when I got here to the U.S. And went to summer school, first grade and second grade. And then I fell in love with learning. And then ever since then, I strive to be the best that I could at everything that I possibly could, whether it be sports, whether it be education, whether it be organizing, whether it be work. And I'm really grateful for my parents because they instilled to me and the work ethic that, hey, my only job was to be the best person that I could be. My only job was to work as hard as I could at school.